Hello, everyone. Welcome to Basking in the Evergreen with me, David Green, where we return with the winner and the person who didn't win, because I don't like to say loser, to talk about everything that happened on the green room and a little bit more. We get to know our contestants a little bit more. With me is Frank Martin, the winner of the green room.
A very
Thanks so
good
much.
one, I might add. Was
What's
it
that? Sorry.
a very good one?
A very good one. It was. It was a great one. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But first of all, apologies. This was supposed to happen last week, but it was delayed because I had COVID and I couldn't do it. I was just coughing too much. So everyone was gracious enough to reschedule. So I am here for the next hour with Frank, and after that, we're going to take a little break, 3 minutes, and then Anita Stewart has the misfortune of being interviewed by Ron Lahr. Somebody has to do it. Someone has to speak to Ron. It's just in the contracts that we all signed for Go Indie now. So thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you're going to enjoy this chat with. I have some questions for Frank. If you have questions for Frank, please put them in there as well. Anita is already here, lurking until she's up. And also, hello, Nikki. How are you getting on? And Rebecca Jonesy, hello. She's also lurking well, writing. Very, very good. COVID does suck balls. I'm not in a good way. And Frank is coughing as well.
I do, but I don't got COVID. I got the dreaded "I have 3 kids" disease.
Yes. Yeah, that is the way. I've only got the one, and it's bad enough. So 3, I don't know. But also, while you're here as well, we can send stars, so please send us some stars for us to let our hosts and producers know how much you appreciate what we do here at Go Indie Now. There we go. Every time you contribute, you get entered into Go Indie Now's season prize package drawing with gift cards, swag, and more, which is very enticing. I would like to know what that more is as well. So here we go. Basking in the Evergreen. First of all, how did you feel about winning the green room? And it was a really tight one, and you know, I've said that on the last couple of interviews, but I'm genuine about it. But honestly, this was the tightest one so far. It was a really, really good one. It was very, very. I agreed with all of your points, everyone that made. So, how would you feel about winning anyway?
I mean, I feel good about winning in that I don't like to not win, but it didn't. It felt a little bittersweet because Anita had so many good points and it was such a good discussion that it felt like the competition in and of itself was just an event and a good discussion and a good talk. So it was like I felt good because I won, but at the same point, I didn't feel like there wasn't any non-winning, if that makes any sense.
Right, and did you have a strategy? Because I know at one point, when I think it was when Anita went first on one of them, and you kind of said, oh, I was going to do this one, but I think I might go on. So did you kind of
A little,
think first?
yeah. Well, a little bit. I knew I had a stronger one of my strongest topics, and I was kind of when her second one, I forget what it was, but it was very strong, and I was kind of curious as to whether or not I should put something strong against it, or whether or not I should do like a lame duck topic in order to take the third one. So it
Right.
was a little bit of back and forth. And I think at the end, I chose to do something strong to put against it, so that it was clash of the Titan topics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that's the way as well. You know, because I think if I was one of the contestants, I think I would go with my worst one first, or the one I was least confident about.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, you never know, because you never know what I might respond to the most.
Sometimes you want to start off strong.
Right.
Everybody's
Yeah.
got a different strategy.
Exactly right. So, Nikki, the caster, who is a winner as well, a previous winner, says that's right. That no one loses with a good discussion, which is true. It was a fantastic episode. And then Rebecca Jonesy has a question just for you. I'm not so sure you will probably know what this is more about. How do you feel about being so tight? Yeah, I got there at the perfect.
I I was happy about it because if it was a blowout, I would have been like, yeah, it doesn't really mean that much. But the fact that Anita was stiff competition and she really gave me a run for my money, it feels even better that it came out on top.
Anita was really good, and she was going for blood at some points as well. I think she was really going for it, and I felt really bad for having to choose between the two of you, as I often do. Um, but and like I said on the show as well, was that when I came up with this premise, I was like, this is going to be fun. But then I realised that I'm going to have to choose between two people each time, and I don't like doing that. So
I also felt like I came at it from a different approach in that I do write prose novels, I do publish novels, but for the most part, I write a lot of comics and I crowdfund them, which is it's
right,
just different forms of writing, different forms of engagement online, different forms of marketing. So things that are going to be pet peeves for me are perhaps going to be a little bit different than pet peeves for other people. For instance, there was what was she talking about? Oh, she was talking about people that list their books incorrectly on Amazon. That she said it drove her crazy. And that
yes.
for me, that I mean, like I don't like it. I wouldn't like people to do that, but I wouldn't qualify it as a pet peeve for me simply because that's not in my wheelhouse. I don't really put a lot of my own books on Amazon. I don't check rankings a lot, so it's not something that's on my radar from day to day.
Yeah, and that is something that does annoy me. But you came up with something that annoyed me a lot more on the second one. But that was one of the things. But also before we go on, it is Patrick's Day. I am in Ireland, so I just wanted to say to everyone that's watching, Fóilte Rove Machidre, which is welcome, my friends. I hope you're all having a very, very good Patrick's Day. If you celebrate, if you have any Irish blood, I saw a great factoid just yesterday that as a population of Ireland, there is 620% more American Irish people than there is Irish people living in Ireland, which is incredible. So if you're Irish blood and you're watching in Ireland, happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you. We love you all. So
I have a question for you then.
Okay.
So in America, we say that everyone's Irish on St. Patrick's Day. Now, how do you
Right.
feel about that being in Ireland?
It's just it's one of those things. Like I think I genuinely like American people, which sounds like a really weird thing to say, but I do because look, it's a huge country. There's so many people living in America, and lots of people with different views and different points of view and all that kind of stuff. But there's one thing about American people that I think is like across the board, and it's this kind of real curiosity of where you came from, because it's only a new country, and I really like that because growing up in England, because my mother is Irish and my father is English Jewish, so like growing up in England, like you're like, well, you're from England, and it's like if you really kind of drill into it, you'd have all this like rich heritage of where we came from. Like, are we French? Are we Norse? Are we this? Are we that?
That's true, Rebecca.
No one cares. No one cares about it, right? And I just think that's really sad. And I like that about Americans, about how not only is it like your genealogy so well, but it's like you're so interested in all aspects of the culture where you came from. And there's only 5 million people that live in Ireland. That like at one point we had a population of like 7.5 million, and it was driven down to 2 million because of the famine and people having to leave Ireland and everything. So it's great that there's more people around the world that love Ireland and carry on Irish tradition, right? So all power to everyone.
I could get into that topic all day, but we need to move on to why we're ready.
Well, this is your hour. If you want to talk about it, then that's up to you.
Well, America is weird in that, and yes, you touched upon it, because it's not a country that's founded based on history. It's a country that's founded based on ideals. So, and
Right.
anybody can have those ideals regardless of their history. So, and I always thought it was strange is that Israel has been a country, what do we say, 70 years, 80 years or so. And if you ask somebody what's your ethnicity or what's your heritage, you say you're Israeli. That's it. That's the end of the conversation. But if you ask somebody what's their history, their heritage, their ethnicity in America, and you say you're American, you'd be like, no, that's not a good answer. Like, there needs to be more to it. So it's just the way the country was founded. I think that's what it's rooted in.
Yeah, I mean, it was founded by, if we ignore the Puritans, other than the Puritans, it was fun. It was founded by a lot of people that wanted adventure. They wanted a new life and they wanted something new to do. You know, and there's that bit of I think there's that bit of adventure in a lot of American people's blood, which is can come out in some very strange ways sometimes, but like, you know,
sometimes good ways, sometimes not so good ways.
But you know, I love the creativity of American people, because you know, growing up in England and growing up in Ireland, a lot of our media, a lot of our culture is dictated by Americans. It's dictated by Hollywood and it's dictated by Broadway and other things like that. And that's because we share similar stories because we share a similar culture. But Americans just have this thing where it's like, you know what, we're gonna. There's lots of comments going through about America at the moment. This is great, but you know, Americans have this, like, especially compared to English people, where it's like English people can be like, we're not going to do this. I'll come back to this comment, Nikki, because this was me today, and I will come back to it and I'll explain it. But English people are very kind of, and Irish people to an extent, it's like, yeah, we're not going to do this. But Americans are like, why can't we do this? Let's do it. Let's do this thing. And I think that there's something to be admired about that. And you're a perfect example of that, because you're like, yeah, I'm going to write novels. I'm going to write comics too. I'm going to do this and this. Why not? Why not do them all?
There's a concept in politics, and sometimes it works to our benefit, sometimes it doesn't, called American exceptionalism, which just Americans think that they're just inherently exceptional. So they have kind of a little bit of an arrogance to them that they're just like, yeah, of course, I'm just going to conquer from coast to our continent, from coast to coast, because we're Americans. Of course it belongs to us. So yeah, it definitely comes out in weird ways, sometimes good, sometimes not so good. But yeah, I can't really change where I am.
Yeah, I think it's great. You know, it's one of those things. It's like, you know, it's a weird time that we live in, and yes, America has a rebel spirit, but it's just one of those things where it's like, I remember many years ago now, I went to Egypt, and I was traveling with my Irish passport at the time, so everyone was like, Ireland, yes. I don't sound like an Irish person. I have a very strong Mancunian accent, which is Manchester in the UK, but everyone was like, Ireland, yeah, Ireland. And then I met these American people there, and they were like, yeah, we've been telling everyone we're Canadian the entire
time. Yeah, you get weird receptions depending on where you go.
Exactly. So just before we get into some other questions, and again, people that are watching, if you've got some questions, please get them in for Frank as well. I'm going to go a little bit more into Frank's background now. But Nikki's question about, or comment about green beer, talk about St. Patrick's Day. So green beer, it's just, even though blue is the official Irish colour, apparently, blue is the national colour of Ireland. It's so blue, and I will tell you why. So blue is the colour for St. Patrick, and our official flag isn't the one that you see all the time. It's actually a blue background with a gold harp on the front of it. And even if you go into the president's house, it's all blue carpets, blue everything. It's just a little known fact that you're all wrong about the green. Change the green, get rid of it now. This green is fine. So, Frank, one of the things that you did mention in the green room, and we're kind of going to go through this in a kind of a long around way. Frank is wearing a blue shirt. Yes, I have blue eyes. I guess that's my thing for it. I do have a mixed accent. Yes, I'm wondering about the accent. Yeah, I grew up in Manchester. I'm Irish. I've been in Ireland for the last 14 years again, so it's just all over the place. But you have written quite a lot of novels, And you've also done a lot of comics as well. And if anyone wants to check them out, you can just go to franktherewriter.com and you can see them all on there. And there's also some free reads. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I know this is going to annoy you, because one of the things that
Ooh,
you
bring it on.
one of the things that you said that you hated that people would say, this story that you're working on, are you going to write it as a comic, or are you going to write it as a book? Because as you were saying, and we're going to talk about this more in a little bit, the different mediums, and you have an idea that's set for this thing. But what do you prefer to write? Is there a preference, or is it just like you just love them both? And it's,
I love them both for different reasons. I think I prefer writing in comics simply because it's a bit easier. Because writing in comics is like, I call it resource management. Like, you need to tell a story. You only have so many pages. You only have so many panels per page. So a lot of it feels more like a puzzle that you need to solve rather than a story that you need to tell.
Right.
And I enjoy that kind of activity of, if I have an action scene, how am I going to have this action scene play out over 3 pages with different art? If I have a certain amount of dialogue, how am I going to break this dialogue up with a certain amount of panels per page? And so I enjoy that challenge, that puzzle of making that work, which is less work than just sitting down and having to stare at a white screen and type out words for a novel. At the same time, there's a purity that comes with writing prose, where the writer has a direct connection to the reader that doesn't exist in comics. Really, my story as a comic writer is being filtered through an artist. So it's a much more collaborative medium. I'm using the artist as a tool to tell a story rather than having that direct shot right to the reader's brain with my words, which is a more pure form of storytelling that I appreciate.
Yeah, because that's one of the things. I mean, I've been a comic book fan for since I was a young child, and then when you kind of discover, obviously growing up in England, I was a big fan of 2000 AD.
Still going strong.
Still going strong, Judge Dredd and everything like that. But I always used to find it interesting that you used to have like some of the writers, you'd see some interviews, and back in those days, like the interviews would be few and far between. Like there was no like kind of, obviously there was no internet, so you wouldn't see like anything that was happening at conventions or anything. But you'd see some kind of things where the writers would be like, well, the art is good, but that's not quite how I pictured it. And I never used to kind of understand that until like working on a novel, and then trying to, when someone's making a cover for you and you're kind of like, no, it's not quite like this. And because that the reader, when they see that cover, even if it's just a snippet of the story, that is going to be their thing in their head where they're trying to picture, and that's the lens that they're looking through at the story. So for a comic, every panel is art, right? So how is that for you when you're kind of like looking at it and you're creating this world, you're creating these characters, you're creating the story and everything, but what is the art is what people visualize.
It can either be immensely frustrating or immensely exhilarating, because when you're working with an artist, and you have to once again, you have to understand that your words are being filtered through an artist. So if you have a lockstead on this is the way it needs to look, your artists, you got to give them free reign to be a storyteller too. Some of the best comic. So it's a lot of times people will see artwork and they'll see tremendous art and they'll be like, wow, you should draw comics. But drawing for comics is a skill set all its own. You have to be a visual storyteller. And so when you're working with an artist whom I trust, whom I know is great, it's a whole nother type of process and mindset in allowing them free reign to put their own touches on the story and to do things that you didn't think was going to happen. And you have to, when you're writing a novel, it's all you. So it's definitely a different mindset where you have to step back and say, look, I'm a partner on this. I have to let them put their touches on it, their DNA on it. and there's a reason I'm working with this person, or I chose to work with this person, and I have to trust them that they know what they're doing.
Right. So this comment here from Rebecca, would you agree with that sentiment? 'Cause obviously, in a book, you can set the scene with narration, with with description and everything. But obviously, with a comic book, there is like little bits of description in the kind of like block speech, and then there's the dialogue. But what you see is what you see, right? And is that the way? Would you agree with what Rebecca's kind of saying there?
I think Rebecca has some comic book bias. I'm not going to agree with it. I think it all depends on the story that you're telling. You know, sometimes you can have, like you said, narration as part of a comic book that sets the mood, that gets you in there, into the feel of things. And other times a comic book can take all of that narration out and just let the artwork tell the story for it. So it really depends on the narrative choices that are going to be made. And every storyteller is different. So
Right.
one of the things that a great activity is to take a script and give it to 5 different artists and have them adapt that same script and see the differences, the different choices that they make. And you'll feel a different story in each one, because everyone brings their own style, their own voice. So yeah, the art in and of itself is a storytelling tool that can bring different aspects to whatever's going on the page.
Yeah, that's the great thing about when you go just writing in general, writing prompts. And one of the I agree, Nicky, as well. Yeah, a single panel can be fantastic as well. Writing prompts are really, really interesting, because you could get like a group of 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 people and say, here is the prompt, and you'll get the same amount of different stories, and just from a few different words, because everyone is different. Everyone brings their perspective to it, their experiences to it, and everyone's mind works in a different way as well. A simple line of something someone might think is hilarious, and someone might think it's the most sinister thing they've ever seen.
The flip side to that is, when I was first starting out, I was part of a lot of comic book forums, and there was a lot of playing around and experimenting going on. And one artist said, I was working on a story. I drew 5 pages, but it wasn't working out. I'm not doing anything with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post these 5 pages online, and I want people to write scripts of dialogue for these 5 pages, and I'll letter it and put it together in an anthology, which I thought was an experiment, kind of to see what people could do. And it was very cool. It had like 6 stories with the same 5 pages of art, but all the dialogue for the 5 pages was different. So it's very cool the way people can see one thing and then just use that one thing as a tool to tell different stories based on what they think needs to be told.
Right, yeah. And that ties into another comment there from Rebecca, where she actually says that she does love comics. She doesn't have the comic bias. But the bottom part of the comment here is like, it's her. She wants things to look like her imagination and not someone else's imagination, which is one of those things what you get into with adaptation in general. And Nicky mentions that below as well about adaptation. I mean, I've worked on screenplays before adapting other people's work, and it is one of those things where it's like, well, you're always going to hit that barrier where it's like, well, I thought it looked like this, or I thought it went like this. And that's the thing with speech and description and narration. When it's left to your own imagination, there's always going to be some kind of disconnect. So there must be some very kind of like maybe heated conversations with the artists sometimes, because you're both going to be on different pages sometimes.
Sometimes when, I've had contentious relationships with artists, and I've had other relationships with artists where we just hit it off. We know what the other's thinking, and it's like anything else. Sometimes you get along, sometimes you don't. And if it's better to find out early on in the process whether or not you're going to be butting heads on the way things are going to look and whatnot. A lot of times I'll write a script, and if an artist decides to change something in the script, I'll let them run with it unless I feel like their change is going to impact the story itself. That's usually where I draw the line, where I need this to look a certain way for a specific purpose. Unless if it doesn't matter, I let the artists kind of interpret it however that they want.
Cool. We have a question from Nikki. It's a good question. So her first stories were cut in comics she drew as a kid, emulating both Garfield and Looney Tunes, which is not a surprise, knowing Nikki. So she wants to know what your influences were in I guess just in comics and prose as well.
I didn't do a whole lot of reading growing up. So I used to hate this question because I'm like, hey, who am I going to say? I mean, I love Neil Gaiman. I love his prose and his comics. But as far as my biggest influence on like my stories and storytelling in general is I've like came to a realization, I guess in the last year or two, that Are You Afraid of the Dark was a huge influence on me. That 90s TV show on Nickelodeon. I watched that show religiously. And I watched so many episodes. And the thing I loved about it was that it was a different story every episode. And it was billed as like a kid's horror show, but they touch upon so many different genres. You know, some are comedy, some are science fiction, some are supernatural, some are kind of noir based, some are magical. It's just like they're all over the place. And when I look at my body of work, it's all over the place too. And I love touching on all these different stuff because I loved watching this show that just was, they basically ran with whatever idea was in the writer's head. They didn't really hold themselves back.
Yeah, I think influences are funny. I mean, I don't know exactly how old you are, but I guess you're around the same age as me. I think we probably grew up around the same time. And it's funny for our kind of generation when you talk about influences, because obviously, like with my writing, I have some like other classics that are influences as well. Like, you know, and if you went back to like people that kind of the generation before us, that would be their main influences. So you get like a lot of people like, yeah, this, and it'd be the same kind of things. But like for my, like, I write epic fantasy and I write urban fantasy. And my epic fantasy, even though there is probably like parallels to other things, my main influence is the Dragon Age video game. So which is like one of these things. It's like one of our generation's things, like where video games is an influence. And the other one, the urban fantasy, the main influence for that was a TV show called Erie, Indiana. I don't know if you remember with
Erie, Indiana. It sounds very familiar.
It was like this like little weird town, and anyone in the comments remember it. And it was the kid from Hocus Pocus, I think, or maybe Casper. I can't remember which one. I think it was Hocus Pocus was the main kid in it. And it was just this weird town that was in the Pacific Northwest, I think, and it was just weird things that are happening there all the time. Like one guy that lived there was like ended up being like Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein. You know what I mean? And these two kids were investigating it all the time on the BMXs and stuff. And it was like, you know, Nikki remembers it. And it was just one of those things. It's like, you know, very, very niche. Like Are You Afraid of the Dark? And one of those things where it's like we have these different kinds of influences because of the generation of how we grew up.
Media was exploding when we were growing up, so it could come at us from so many different angles. I'm 36, by the way, Nikki, in case you were wondering.
Oh, yeah, I'm a little bit old, not too much, but a little bit.
So I would say my first, so growing up, middle school kind of age, I was writing a whole bunch of short stories, a lot of fan fiction, and then I decided I'm going to write a novel. It's going to be the greatest novel ever written. And because I was a teenager running through puberty, stuck in adrenaline-filled video games, I basically took all of the different qualities of all the video games that I loved growing up, all the stories like Halo and Metal Gear Solid and Dragon Ball Z, and I basically took them all and I threw them in a blender and I turned it on, I spun it around, and that was my original novel containing all of these elements from these different stories. And I think that was one of the great things, like you said, about the time we're growing up, is that we had access to so much different media, and we were able to touch into so many different things that I used it as kind of fuel to propel my first novel, which admittedly it was terrible, but I felt very proud in that in recent years, over the years I've gone back and rewritten probably like a dozen times. and I actually got it published. It's my book called A Weapon's Journey, which I felt proud of it in that I like had this really dumb book that I wrote as a kid. I was able to polish it up and actually get it published.
Yeah, and that is and it's not, it's published by a Crossroad Press, isn't it? So it's someone else read it and was like, yeah, this is great. And that's a great thing to have, isn't it? When someone else looks at it and goes, yeah, you know what, people should read this.
That's kind of, it's weird. Like as writers, like that's the whole foundation of our profession, is that we need to write for people. And yet still, when somebody reads something and goes, yeah, this is pretty good, it still feels good no matter how many times.
Right, exactly. And you kind of don't believe them as well. You kind of like, well.
I never believe them. No, I'm convinced there's a vast conspiracy of people in a group chat just saying, hey, we're going to tell Frank that this is good, right? It's definitely going on somewhere. The Illuminati's behind it.
Yeah. Just going back onto the influences thing, because that was something I kind of wanted to. And Rebecca says that that your book is pretty good, so that's good. She might be in this group. We don't know. But in terms of this, when it comes to, and you probably get this all the time when you've been like kind of interviewed or stuff, I kind of feel like, again, people of our kind of generation, especially if you're writing comic books, is that people will be saying to you like Watchmen or the Dark Knight Returns or The Killing Joke are the ones that are like the ones that are the big
books that you have to read, like the staples of the medium.
Yeah. I mean, I presume that you have read those ones. I mean, everyone has kind of read them, but it's funny that those are the things that, and like you say, like our generation is like, well, yeah, we've read them, but we like these weird video games and these weird TV shows that were like cancelled after like 3 weeks or whatever. I mean, do you get that a lot? Do you get that kind of thing where it's like, oh, you must have read Watchmen, or you must have like Frank Miller must be a huge influence and all this kind of stuff?
And sometimes I'm in a lot of comic reading groups, and there's every once in a while people bring up like the mainstay books that you have to read, or you're not a real comic fan unless you've read V for Vendetta and stuff like that. But like people are into different things. I get that as a storyteller, I love watching classics, especially stuff that's like genre defining classics, because there's something to learn about it purely from an academic standpoint. So I love reading things like that, like Mouse, that are considered landmarks of the medium, simply because it's a learning opportunity. But if you're a fan, if you're a reader, and you just don't get anything other than entertainment from what you're reading, like I get it, you don't have to read it, but definitely as a student of the medium, I feel like there's a lot that I can learn from Watchmen, even if Alan Moore discredited it, like curses it off a million times. Right. He is one of my favorite comic writers. He's a big influence on me too, if I would name him. But he is he's definitely out there. He's an influence on me, I would say, professionally, not so much personally.
Right. Yeah. He's kind of grumpy.
He's a weird character. He's definitely a weird character. And you know what? Not to in his defense, he's been toyed around a lot in the industry. So I get if he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder.
Ooh, that's a very controversial comment right here as well.
I didn't love the joke. Okay, that's fine.
See, the thing, I think the Killing Joke, I think it's one of those things that it's like, it's good, but the ending really elevates it, and the mystery of the ending.
It's a weird ending. I was a huge. I like it. I was really looking forward to the animated adaptation of it, which definitely fell flat. It did not translate well onto film. Even if they added on that whole prologue, there was a lot that they could have done to make it stand on its own. That it was one of the biggest, I think, comic adaptation failures in animated history.
Yeah. And they usually get it quite right as well. DC Animation usually can do a really good job of it, and for whatever, it's just one of those things. I think Killing Joke is like, very of its time, and it's very much like it's a comic. And as you were saying on the green room, it's a comic book, right? That is the story. It's suited for comic book, right? And it's not a movie. It's not a book. It's not this. This is what it is. It exists in this way. And you can adapt many things, but that is its thing in its purest form.
Yeah, I think that's one of Alan Moore's biggest strengths is that he loves comic books. He writes for comic books, and that's why adaptations of his work have been so controversial and so all over the place. Is because his stories are so tailored to that medium, and it doesn't just. It's very hard to twist it and adapt it into a suitable medium for something else.
Because I mean, there's some of them there, and Joe, going in now's comment there about gatekeeping, just in general needs to stop. Like gatekeeping is just, it's just kind of pathetic in a little bit of way. Let people enjoy what they enjoy, but like with Alan Moore, it's an interesting one because like there's been some terrible Alan Moore adaptations, but there's been some ones that I'm like. They're quite good.
I was
like,
a pretty big fan of the Watchmen movie. I like the Watchmen movie. And it was much different. And people hate on Zack Snyder all the time. But I'm like, this book has been notoriously difficult to adapt for a long time. And he took it and did the best that he could. And I enjoyed watching it. So, I mean, I think a big problem today is that people expect way too much from their media. Like I'm going back and watching all the fun stuff I watched in the 90s that I loved, and I'm watching it now with my son who's 10 years old, and we watched Independence Day, and I'm like, I love this movie, I loved watching it now, but I never realized how absolutely cheesy this movie is. Like, it's super corny. If this movie came out now, people would tear it to pieces for how goofy it is. But it's like people just expect too much. I think just have fun. People don't have
right. Yeah,
fun
exactly. And that's
movies.
the way we used to do. Just have fun with it. I was watching. I was watching a couple of months ago. I watched. Me and my son watched the original 3 Star Wars movies, and then we watched Willow a few months later. And I used to love Willow as a kid, and we watched it again, and I always kind of knew that it was basically this, like, it's written by George Lucas, so I was like, it's the same story basically as Star Wars. But I was watching it, and my son he wasn't even turned 5 at this point, and he looked at me and was like, "This is just the same as as the Star Wars movies," and I was like, "Yeah." Yeah, it's the same. It's all 3 of them just pushed together into one movie, and that's fine. It's entertaining. It's good. That's just what it's supposed to have been. So your books are getting a lot of love in the comments. Rebecca is really cheering this. That's great. But I kind of wanted to talk about one of the things I want to talk about. And you've mentioned it. You've touched on it a couple of times. Obviously, with comic book is collaboration, but you haven't just drawn the line, and no pun intended, at the comic books, but also you have co-authored Predestiny as well. You worked with
yes, which it's being re-released now. We're kind of giving a new update and some new covers, which is nice.
Oh yeah, awesome. So I mean, is this obviously collaboration is something that is very very. And CT Fitz, by the way, is a great artist. He did what's that Lovecraftian Cthulhu Armageddon?
Cthulhu Armageddon, the series.
Yeah, which is great as well. So obviously, collaboration is something that you genuinely believe in. So why did you decide that you wanted to co-author a novel, and how is that different from working, or is it different from working with an artist on a comic book?
It's way different. Why I decided to do it? Because we're buddies and we wanted to do it. That was kind of the answer. What is the difference? The difference is I'm a plotter and he's a pantser, and we constantly clash. That's the short of it. I'll give him, and I need to know the way the story's going before I start writing it, and we'll get halfway through, and he's like, "Yeah, I know this chapter was up next, but I decided to do something different." I'm like, "No, now all the dominoes are gonna fall in the wrong direction. What are you doing?" But if going when we're said and done, and I go back and I read through what we've written, I realize that his fingerprints combine with my fingerprints to make something completely unique. And
Right.
the original idea for the story, the basic idea was, the question is, if you could go back in time and kill Hitler, would you do it? And what if Hitler at that time was just like a normal, average 14-year-old boy who found out he grows up to become this mass murderer? And
Right.
it's not Hitler. We have a completely original character, but that was basically the idea, is that what if you found out that your future was to become this monster? How would you feel? And because it was my idea originally, I have this vision of as to what this story should be. And he comes in and he starts throwing in some cyberpunk and some crazy like, time traveling assassins. And I'm like, I never envisioned all of this to be part of the story. But at the end of the day, it is a collaboration. And what we've created together is really a marriage of both our styles of writing. And I love the way that it wound up.
Yeah. Yes, your cat is getting longer.
Mm,
Just
he's a bummer.
growing.
He's one of two. The other one is out of the room. But yeah, I usually, whenever I do live streams, I usually have a dog or a cat behind me. So
Yeah, just hanging around there. But
yeah,
and yeah, I'm trying to limit my drinking, but it's Patrick's Day, so I've had a few today. So it's the way we do it. And also, Nikki's saying that a planter is an unholy abomination. I am a planter, so I must be very unholy, which I am. So yeah, so that so yeah, that's
a
interesting.
planter, a plant.
A planter, yeah,
Is that supposed to be a pant?
it's a pantser and a planner mixed together in one, just to do the thing. So yeah, it's interesting because I was looking at that book and I was kind of looking at, obviously there's a lot of sci-fi elements in it, and I've dabbled with sci-fi, and generally speaking, and people that I know that write sci-fi tend to be plotters a lot more, because it all has to work. There's a science behind it. So bringing in that kind of collaboration, and then someone who is a complete pantser must have been. I mean, there must have been a lot of drinking involved on your.
Yeah, every time I get a new chapter from him, I cringe just a little bit, but like, what did he do this time? But at the end of the day, it's like a workout. I mean, you hate it when you're doing it, but when you're done, you're glad you did it. And I'm really proud of those books. We're working on the third now, which is the finale to the trilogy. So it's a fun series, and we're re-releasing it. We put a lot more cyberpunk elements into it. Got new cyberpunk covers, so we're gearing more towards that kind of demographic. Right. So, but it's still at the core. It still remains the same kind of idea of this story, as to reconciling your destiny, your future.
Yeah. When is it coming out again? When is the re-release happening?
Both of the first two volumes were already re-released, and I guess we will have a release for the third one next year.
Excellent stuff. And you've dabbled in quite a lot of different genres as well. You've got your sci-fi and you've got your cyberpunk, and you've done a Drabble collection as well, which is 100 Drabbles. Which, and people that don't know what a Drabble is, it's a story in 100 words, exactly 100 words. And you've also done horror as well. So I mean, I can see. And that doesn't really surprise me, because I mean, obviously, I can see the posters behind you, and I can see one of them is.
You got Terminator, Empire Strikes Back. What's this one? Oh, that's Spider-Man. What's that?
Spider-Man.
That's Dark Knight. So yeah, this is my movie room. So we got.
Yeah. The Terminator one is the one that. That's why David drinks so much.
I think that's a Czech poster, to be honest.
Yeah, but that's the one that kind of interests me, because when kind of looking at your kind of body of work, there is this kind of real kind of, if there's anything that I can kind of see which is like a through line of stuff, there's this real kind of horror and sci-fi things together, and Terminator is one of the most perfect horror sci-fi films ever made, I think. So is that something that you, is it obviously you've got a poster of it, so you must be a fan of it. Is that something that's been an influence on you?
No, No, my father gave me that. I've seen it maybe once. I've seen the second one much more times. I like
Really?
it.
Oh yeah, of course.
I
Yeah,
would,
yeah.
but I'll argue with you. I would say perfect horror sci-fi movie is Alien.
Alien. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was thinking that when I was saying that, and I was
I was
like,
like, it didn't sound right when it came out of my mouth.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
because yeah,
Alien would definitely be a big influence, and yeah, I would say horror is definitely my the genre that I'm most comfortable in. I don't know why. Probably because I love writing villains so much that horror, just a good horror villain, it feels good just putting yourself in that diabolical mindset and have the thoughts that are never acceptable in public that you just
sure, yeah,
get to just live out those darkest fantasies is very
yeah,
freeing.
yeah. I mean, yeah, because the thing I was thinking about Alien, the difference between Aliens and Terminator, essentially, like is that Terminator is like a sci-fi slasher movie, and Alien is kind of like a sci-fi haunted house movie, but like with a slasher as well, right? And it's funny when you kind of like break things down to that kind of level of like, what is this trying to do? And is that something that you kind of look at when you're kind of like doing your? And by the way, the comments have gone really south where they're talking about. We're going to come back to Nikki's comment about Rebels in a little while, but they're talking about sex symbols and being immortal and other things like that. We'll ignore them for a second.
I can't
Um,
see him, so
but is that something that, because obviously when you were talking in the green room, you were talking about how like ideas, you get an idea and it originates, and you're like, this is an idea for a comic book. And I mean, even with your comic books, you have the Modern Testament series, and you have some kind of one shots and minis and what have you. And with your books, you have similar. You have one off novels, you have series and all that kind of stuff. Is that how you kind of look at stuff and say when you have that idea of something and it's like this is going to be this or this is going to be this? Do you break it down and you're a plotter? Do you break it down to that kind of like essential thing, like with Terminator, where it's like it's a slasher movie but with a robot and it's sci-fi, and with Alien it's a haunted house movie with this. Do you break it down to that kind of level just to say like this is what this is and it is better suited for this, or is it more like of an instinctual kind of thing that you think of?
I think breaking it down happens afterwards. It's not like I have the basis and then I build up the idea. It's more like I have this idea, and then afterwards, when I'm plotting it out, when I'm outlining it, I realize what the core of the story is. Like you said, whether it's a haunted house movie or whether it's I should say story, or whether it's a romantic comedy at heart, or whether it's a fugitive type story. It never really starts out as that core essential premise or that core idea. It starts out as something more complex. And then as I'm breaking it down, I realize, okay, this is really what it is at its most fundamental level. And at that point, you could start doing fun stuff like playing off of tropes and subverting expectations. Once you realize what the soul of the story is, that's when you can really have fun taking things into new directions and taking things into uncharted territory.
Right. And so when is it in the process when you have a new idea? Is it at its genesis, or is it a little bit kind of later on where you kind of like let it marinate a little bit, where you decide where this is a comic book or this is a story, or do you even think like I need to think of a new comic book and what story can I think of to fit this or a novel? When does that, just to get away from that idea of like, well, what's this going to be? Like, I want to know like when is it that in your mind? Like, when do you get to that point?
I don't know, man. These are tough questions. Just do it. I just do the thing. I don't know how I breathe. I just breathe.
Right.
I mean, writers, I think, look at the world differently. We just walk through the world and we'll see a person. I'll give you an example. I was at Dunkin' Donuts the other day, and I saw an old guy, and he looked exactly like a guy that I saw the day before, except he was much older. He was like 70 instead of 30. And I was like, what
Right.
if there was a person who woke up every day and he was just a different age? Like one day he'll be 12, he'll wake up the next day and he'll be 25. And that was just like waiting in line at Dunkin' Donuts. An idea for a story just popped in my head, and it
Yeah.
went in. It left my head 5 minutes later. And I'm not going to write a story about it. I'm not going to turn it into a comic book. But I think writers do that all the time. We view the world in stories, and sometimes we latch onto them and we develop them further, and other times they just are lost into the abyss. So I don't really decide what sometimes I decide to flesh out into a comic book or a novel, and what decides just to go away. It just kind of just happens.
It sticks, and then instinctively you'll be like, yes, what an idea that grabs you, you'll be like, this is a comic book, or this is a because it's weird, because it's one of those things that I couldn't answer it, because I kind of like would know that if I have an idea, I'd be like, this is one book or two books, but this is 4 books or 5 books. You know what I mean? Like you just know on a level.
I'll give you a good example. I wrote a fantasy book, and I wrote 2 of them. They were planned trilogy. So I came up with the idea, and the whole thing was I want to write my Game of Thrones. Like that was where I started. Like I see Game of Thrones. It's an epic. It's a fantasy epic with a whole bunch of different characters, and I want to do my version of that. And I know I'm not a really high fantasy guy, so I'm like, I'm never going to do something like this again. But I wanted to tackle it, and that was where I started with. I started with a drive to do something similar to that. So that was completely unique. But it's all different. You know, there's not one formula to how things develop. It's all over the place. Or 4 books in a.
This is a specific attack against me. So, before we start wrapping things up, I could actually talk to you all day, because there's so many things I'd love to talk to you about. I just want to go back to before the kind of smut took over the comments. It's go indie now, so smut always comes in at some point. It's just one of those things. There was a comment from Nikki DeCaster about Drabbles, because it's one of those things that, you know, Drabbles are an interesting thing to kind of look at. And she asked you, it's more basically a comment there. It's like, you know, it's a test of your own editing and storytelling skills. So, you know, to put in a book of 100 Drabbles, a collection of 100 Drabbles, how did you find that? Is that
so
something?
This was the concept. Kickstarter does an event every January called Make 100, which if you want to be part of this event, you come up with an idea for a product, and you're going to make exactly 100 of that product. So my idea was I wanted to write an anthology of Drabbles, but I was too lazy to come up with 100 ideas for these stories. So basically, I had people commission me through the Kickstarter to write short stories, 100 of them. So basically, I had a whole bunch of backers, and then they came up with individual ideas. And I came up with a plan throughout the month of February to write 5 Drabbles every day for every weekday for 4 weeks. And I used their ideas as the prompts for those stories. And it was probably one of the worst writing months of my life. It doesn't seem like it's that hard. It's just 500 words a day. But because the genres are all so over the place, and the styles and the voices and the tones, I was writing 100-word sci-fi story, and then I had to shift gears and write a 100-word horror story, and just the shifting back and forth between all of these different types of stories, it was a lot more draining than if I just wrote 3,000 words of a single chapter, you know?
Right.
So that's how it came up. And I continue to write Drabbles. I post weekly. I post stories Monday, Wednesday, Friday across my social medias. And on Friday, I post a Drabble. So I have a new Drabble posted every Friday. So I continue to do it. As Nikki was saying, I find it to be a great exercise in just briefness. You know?
Yeah.
It's like the puzzle of creating a comic. Drabbles are a puzzle too, because you add in one word, it changes everything for the rest of the story. You take out a word, it has to be exactly the way you want it to be. So
there's
I love the challenge of it. Yeah,
there's a form to it as well. Like, you know, there's a form where it's like, you know, specifically the last line of a Drabble, it has to do something. Like, you know, it has to.
Yeah, there has to be a point to it. So
Right.
I mean, it's Friday today, so I posted one today. If anybody wants to, I think it's about one day consisting of like every single different type of weather there is.
That's like living in Ireland, by the way. That's general day. Before we finish, we've got a few minutes before we finish. What I really wanted to kind of get onto, and we have to kind of, sadly, we have to kind of be brief about it. But you mentioned it there, you touched on it. You do a lot of crowd funding, you do a lot of stuff through Kickstarter. You have a comic at the moment going through Kickstarter, if I'm not mistaken.
I do. It's a very weird one, personal to me.
Right, excellent. So just you've got 2 minutes. Just talk
2
about
minutes to pitch it.
Talk about your Kickstarter. Talk about your work.
So this Kickstarter is called Cabin 818. The story is about a comic writer who decides to get away from his family and rent a cabin for a night to finally get some work done. And the basic idea is all of his insecurities and anxieties come to life to haunt him and prevent him from writing. And it basically turns into this giant rabbit hole of as you were saying, break it down to the core, a haunted house story. But all of the hauntings are his own fears, his own worries. And for me, it was just basically taking all of the feelings I have as a writer and just pouring them out onto the page. It's about imposter syndrome and dealing with family and all your worries that you have as a writer. And completely lost the train of thought because I was just going in so many different directions. But it's one of them. It's very weird. I consider it a weird horror story. Oh, I know what I was going to say. It's very reminiscent of 1408, the Stephen King short story. It's very reminiscent of that in that it's just wild shit happens all throughout the entire story. But it's meta because the main character's name is Frank Martin, so I really put myself in these shoes. Right. And I think every time we write a story, we're vulnerable in a way. We're naked because we're telling our tale, and it makes us nervous when people read it. But this one especially so because it's just so personal, and I basically just bled my psyche all over the page. So if you're a writer, if you get nervous and you have insecurities, maybe it will resonate with you.
So how many days are left on the Kickstarter?
I think 7. I think it ends next Friday.
Perfect. Another week left to go. Anyone watching it, go and check it out. You can find Frank everywhere on the internet. You can see there in his name there at Frank the Writer.
Oh, it went away.
It's gone. But I presume that is your Twitter, your
Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you look for this thing, you could find me. And also my website too is the same thing. www.franktherewriter.com.
franktherewriter.com. Perfect. Frank, it's been great to talk to you. I literally could do this for an hour long, even longer than an hour. But it's been really, really great talking to you. Well done for winning the green room as well, and best of luck with the rest of the Kickstarter. Hopefully you get all the stretch goals and everything like that.
I appreciate it, David. Thank you.
And that was perfect timing. So
well done.
Perfect timing. So.
I cut us off.
3 minutes. Take a little break. Ron Lahr will be back in Stu AF Stewart. Thank you everyone for watching. It's always time to go indie now.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of Words That Kill, and today we're going to be discussing murderous betrayal. Won't that be fun? So I'm going to turn it over to her now and let her introduce herself, so take it away.
Hi, like she said, I'm Bree Tart, fantasy author. I like writing stuff for teens and adults with touches of mythology and folklore in it, and lots of times that includes royal intrigue and backstabbing and, epic deaths and battles and all that jazz. So
when you're betraying your protagonist, you've got a built-in sympathy. So how do you, for lack of a better word, milk the sympathy?
Well, again, you dig into their backstory, you dig into their trauma, you dig into their motivations. Did they have a horrible childhood? Did they have, something? Were they brainwashed? Were they blackmailed? There's a lot of different reasons why somebody could do the betrayal, and a lot of it is going to be explored after the reveal, honestly, when they dig deeper into their motivations. And sometimes, they don't necessarily need the sympathy, in my opinion. Like, someone can betray just because they believe in something so strongly that, they want power. They have this goal. They're going to do anything to do it, and the protagonist can't just be a consequence.
Hello, I am not Ron Lahr.
I noticed. Apparently, I've scared Ron off.
You have scared Ron away. He is not here. It's a good job that I didn't just log off and was like, I'm going to watch. Because what's funny is that the clocks have gone forward in America, but they haven't over here. So it's still actually not even midnight here yet. So I was like, I'm going to stay here and watch. But here I am. Here I am. You get to talk to me. I hope that is not. I hope you weren't hoping for Ron, and I've not dashed your dreams.
No, I get to talk to an international sex symbol. What could be better?
How dare you? I'm not hiding my face because I was blushing so much. I was.
The audience might be disappointed though, because we won't get to talk gardening. But what can you do?
It's just Ron is a maverick, but he's also exceptionally boring. Hello everyone, welcome back to Basking in the Evergreen with me, David Green. I am not Ron Lahr. If you wanted to see Ron Lahr, he was on Meme Reviews earlier this week, and so was I, which is very strange. So Anita, you are here. You were the runner-up in the green room, sadly.
Yeah, you can say loser. I am the champion Go Indie Now loser.
I don't like using the word loser because
it's okay, because I've lost the Indie Mayhem 3 times. I lost in this show, so I am actually a champion of losing on Go Indie Now. So
right, well, look, I have a 5-year-old, and I'm trying to say that some words he started to pick up swearing because that's just the world that we live in. He started to pick up something, but I'm just like, they're words. They're words. And I'm like, there are worse things to say, like calling people stupid or calling people an idiot or calling someone a loser. So I'm like,
if it makes you feel better, I will be the runner-up. So
runner-up, thank you very much. So we have some comments already from Anita and Rebecca, who have struck up a very fast friendship. Yes. They are great friends.
I did not bury Ron in his garden. I am not a serial killer, as it says on my website. You can go to my website and see that fact on the About Me. It says I am not a serial killer.
Definitely. But a boring maverick, that is exactly Ron. A boring maverick. So, Anita, obviously you are well known in the Go Indie Now circles, but please, would you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your work.
Well, I write under A.F. Stewart, as you can see there on the screen. I write horror. See, there's my horror book. There's a sequel to that coming out soon, hopefully, if I get it edited. But it's finally starting to come to me, so it may actually get finished. So, and the evil chicken's starting to talk to me, so the Norse Tales might get finished too. So,
yeah, let's hope so. When you go onto your website, which is afstewart.ca, because you are in Canada, which everyone loves, it comes up and it says, "Be afraid of the dark."
Yeah, that's actually ripped off Pitch Black,
right?
The movie Pitch Black with Riddick's. I don't remember the exact quote because it's been a while since I've seen the movie, but it's like, "Are you afraid of the You're not afraid of the dark, are you? That's the quote from Pitch Black. And I sort of ripped that off for the website because I'm a fan of the movie. So
I think that was in the trailer, wasn't it, as well? I think I seem to remember.
It's a great line from the movie.
Yeah. I really like that movie as well. I actually, I've not seen the third one for some reason, but I really
I've seen all three of them.
What's the third one's just called? Riddick, isn't it?
The first one is Pitch Black. The second one's Chronicles of Riddick, and the third one's just Riddick.
Yeah, I really like Chronicles of Riddick. I just thought it was really good.
It's got Carl Urban in it, plus Vin Diesel. I mean, really, what can't you not love about
Carl
that
Urban, just fresh off Lord of the Rings, when everyone was like, "We want a bit of Carl Urban," and he went away for a little while.
I was a Carl Urban fan since his Xena days. So
and Xena Warrior Princess, yeah. I like Chronicles. I liked how campy it was. It was like a middle 2000s version of David Lynch's Dune, which I kind of appreciated. I liked it. So I'm glad that we've bonded on this. So another thing that we both have in common is that we both write. I mean, nowadays I just write predominantly mostly fantasy, but I wrote a lot of horror short fiction, and you are a horror and fantasy writer. So what I've always wanted to ask you, because obviously I've been on Words That Kill, which we saw an advert for before, where you got to ask me questions. But what I've always wanted to ask you is how much of the horror brain bleeds into the fantasy, and how much of the fantasy brain bleeds into the horror? And is there a way of where you're like, no, I am writing this right now? Or do you just let it happen?
Well, my books generally tend to go along mythology and monsters, both in fantasy and horror, so they sort of bleed together nicely. Because that's my main interest, is I mean, I'm a big mythology fan. I have been for since I was young, so I like the monsters. So even when I'm writing fantasy, like I put sea monsters in my trilogy, and in my horror stuff, you've got the monsters coming up to play very mean. So the fantasy stories are always a little dark, and the horror stories, I mean, the only ones that really don't play in the fantasy world are the horror stories where I'm writing serial killers.
Yeah. I mean, serial killers have their own mythology these days, though, as well, don't they?
Yeah.
Which is a weird thing, because it's become that kind of when you especially when Netflix decide to make a new series about a certain serial killer, loads of documentaries about that serial killer pop up, and they're all like, look at all this thing, look at these urban myths that are sprung up about the serial killer.
Well, true crime is an industry unto itself, in which I read a lot of and watch a lot of stuff. I subscribe to a couple of podcasts on you. Sorry, Joe. Sorry. I subscribe to a couple of shows on YouTube. True crime stuff. Well, I Never is one of my favorites. It does a lot of historical true crime, which I love. And I watch all the true crime shows on TV. So that's where I get a lot of my horror ideas.
What is it about true crime in particular? And I don't want to come across as like a kind of using a broad stroke here, but it seems that like women in particular really like true crime and serial killers more than men do, which I think it's fair to say. I think generally, I don't know if you agree. If you don't agree with that, that's fine. You can tell me why you don't agree with it. But if you do, why do you think that is? Like, what it's always fascinated me, because it's like,
well, we're researching how to not be attacked by a serial killer.
Right. That's what I thought. It's a research thing.
These are helpful life tips.
Right.
And I think a lot of it is, a bit cathartic too, because we're watching, stuff people get, how the crimes get solved and stuff like that as well. So how the mean men get captured and put in jail.
Right. And we all want that. We all want them to be captured and put in jail.
And I think a lot of it's the psychology too, because psychological. I don't know if women like gore. I mean, I know some women who like the gore, but I mean, a lot of women who do read the horror like the psychological stuff better. So it might be the same.
Right. Yeah, Nikki agrees with you. She says we watch the true crimes to get tips.
Yeah.
Hopefully those tips are not to murder people.
Well, if you're a horror writer, they are, but mostly it's how not to get in the murder van. So
yeah, because I mean that's what I thought, because it's one of those things. It's like, I'm obviously a white man, and I'm also straight, so I've never really had to worry about a lot of existential stuff besides of the general kind of thing that humans have to. Like, I don't have to worry about walking down a street or anything like that when it's dark and other things. So it's one of those things that I thought it might be one of those things where it's like, just how has this happened? How has this situation happened? But it's a thing as a writer. I mean, and one of the things that I've read a fair bit of your work now, actually, because we've been kind of in the same circles for a while, and you have a lot of empathy as a writer, which is a maybe a strange thing to say, because I think most writers have to have empathy. Like, for my example, I'm a straight white man that's not had to. I've never had to, for example, worry about a job interview of not getting a job interview because of the way that I look or what I am. I'm always like, well, I will probably get at least an interview. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. But I think, as writers, you have to have empathy for a lot of people to kind of see their point of view. But yours in particular, you do have a lot of, and even with the darker side of your writing, you have a lot of empathy for the darker side of things. So, where does that come from? Does it come from research? Does it come from within you? Is it something that you've had to kind of work on and study, or is it just like a natural thing?
I think all my my fictional role models as for a woman were villains. So when I was growing up, because when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of exactly strong women. Women were more supporting characters or wife characters or whatever. So all the strong women were either villains or reformed villains. I was thinking about this a few years ago when people asked me why I write villains so much. I'm going, I wonder why I do write villains so much. And I was thinking, yeah, because all the women characters that I saw, the strong women characters I saw growing up from books and movies and TV stuff, they were all villains.
Right. Yeah.
So basically my role models were evil. So
the other thing with women characters as well, and a lot of things were they were basically men, but they were written as men but looked like women. They didn't act like women, like they didn't have like women's thoughts or viewpoints. I think that's an important thing as well, is to write people how they are, and don't shy away from femininity or masculinity or whatever. It's just like, use that thing as well. And that's something that you do in your work as well.
Yeah, well, like to an example, the cartoon Sleeping Beauty. If you take the two female characters in that movie, Sleeping Beauty, Aurora, I mean, she's sweet, but she's very passive. Things happen to her.
Right.
You take Maleficent, she's turning into a freaking dragon. Now, if you were a kid, which would you want to be? The little passive girl or the dragon? You see? I took the dragon. It's a lot more fun.
Exactly. And this comment from Nikki, if someone, if the next person, if anyone who's watching this, who's going to be on the green room next, if anyone's read my work, and I think that I might write, balanced and strong female characters, this is something that's a huge pet peeve of mine. So if you want an easy point, this is the one to go for. But speaking of points, and speaking of easy points, this was the closest green room so far, and I really agonized over what I was going to choose. Like, in the show, I had to frantically message Joe and say, can you please run something that last a few minutes while I just think a little bit longer about this stuff. So how did you find it? I mean, I don't, you know.
Well, I agreed with all of David's points too. So I mean, it's like I can't disagree with him winning. I agreed with all the points he made as well. So
Yeah, but I think he mostly agreed with yours, except for the one about modeling categories to kind of exploit categories on Amazon, because
well, I
something that
think
he
he
doesn't
agreed
do.
with it. He just didn't affect him as much as say
Didn't affect
someone
him.
like me who's an indie author who actually kind of relies on those categories more than someone who gets traditionally published.
Right.
Because the someone who gets traditionally published or does through a small press, the press does all that.
Right.
You know.
And
So,
they really and they don't have to massage it as much either.
and but for me, I have to go in and I have to check those categories. Which is the best category to? I have to go and look for comps. I have to go and look for also bots and things for keywords so I can do the ads and blah 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 blah. That drives me crazy and gives me a headache. But that's the stuff. So those book categories, they're important to an indie author, and when you're in there trying to find them, and you're finding things like the Bear Shifter that has you in such a tiffy.
Yes.
It skews the data, and it's annoying.
Yeah,
And it really does in the long run. It doesn't benefit the author to do it. So I don't understand why
it
people
doesn't.
do it.
It doesn't. Oh, and thank you, Nikki, for saying that. Human elf, and ghost. Thank you very much. Yeah, because I mean, I was listening to when you were talking about it, and as a writer, I agree completely. Like, you know, it's one of those things that's like, you know, I and this is like a very like kind of personal, kind of petty a little bit, where I've been like in a new release or something. It's been like number 2 in a category, and I've looked at number 1. And it's like, this is nothing to do with this category. Like, and it's number 1, and it's like number 1 across all kinds of categories, because it's either like a big name author or thrown a load of money at it and what have you. But also, like, I look at it as a reader, and I think, and when you were talking about it, I was thinking about, as a reader, you know, I like Greco-Roman stuff. You know, I do. I like the mythology. I like the basis of it. So if I was to look, that would be a category that I would look at and see what's in there, right? And I would want something that is based on this mythology. And if I looked at something and was like, oh, this is number 1. It's got good reviews. It looks good. I got it. It has absolutely nothing to do with this thing. I would be disappointed, because you know, I'd be like, I wanted to read something that was to do with this category.
Yeah, and it did kind of piss me off too that those 2 books, because there was 2 books in the poetry category when I was looking at it that didn't belong there, but they took the spots from the number 101 and 102 author. They could have ranked in Amazon's top 100 and had just that little bit of boost,
right?
For whatever it's worth, even if it's just an ego boost. And they didn't get it because someone put themselves in the wrong category. And that just ticked me off just a little bit.
Yeah. You're right. It's and like the thing is with Amazon as well is that they will try to correct it, but they'll just go way too hard on it as well.
Yeah.
And it'll be the people that will suffer for it are indie publishers and self-published people. It won't be traditional publishers, and it won't be the big people, the big self-published people that have got.
But the biggest people who actually do this are the indie publishers, though, the indie published authors, which is something they shouldn't do, because they just Amazon will then come down on everyone instead of just them. So
Exactly. Yeah, it's very self-destructive. So before as well, when we're talking kind of like about your work and your kind of influences, you talked about how you are a big fan of mythology. So I was just wondering, what kind of mythology are you into? You know, what is an inspiration for you?
My trilogy is inspired a little bit by Greek mythology, because that's kind of what I started with, was the classic Greek mythology. You know, Hades and Zeus and all the brandy affairs of Zeus, which, you know,
he loved having sex with people.
yeah, in weird forms, which I never quite
Weird
understood.
He
But it seemed interesting.
he was into anything.
Yeah, he really was.
Basically.
But he
Yeah.
was the original kinky god. He was.
He really was.
Anyway, but then I kind of got into Norse mythology because, you know, Norse is big. The one I really like and the one I use the most is Celtic mythology. So Irish, Scottish, Welsh. Because I mean, I'm big into that. Started from Arthurian legends, and I sort of, when I started thinking, well, I want to write something on King Arthur, and I started writing fantasy, and then I started researching all the Celtic legends and the mythology and stuff like that. So I use that an awful lot in my books, in my stories.
And with the again, this is another thing that we have in common, because like anyone that knows me knows that I love Lord of the Rings and I love Wheel of Time and other things like that. But he was into anything. Literally, he was into anything and everything that he could get into. He would love bear shifters. But anyway,
he probably was a bear shifter.
He probably was a bear shifter at some point. Yeah, I love like Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time. But the first thing that bear shifters, the first thing that I kind of got into as a reader on my own kind of basis was Arthurian legends. Like I loved Arthur. I still do love Arthurian legends. I think there's so much stuff that you can bring back into it. Like, you know, I think Westerns are based basically loosely on Arthurian legend, because it was like, you know.
So Star Wars. I mean, the original Star Wars movie is basically King Arthur and Merlin.
Yeah, like the samurai stories are based on that kind of thing. It's like you have this base of power or safety, like Camelot, and you have these knights, so samurais or Jedi or cowboys riding out into the wilderness to kind of encounter strange and wonderful things that they kind of have to solve. So with you, with the Arthurian things, you talk about like the kind of Celtic influence. Was there a kind of like a cut-off point for you where you were like, well, this is like the French side of it, and you'd kind of put that aside, or was that something that you kind of included as well? Because obviously there's a quite a dividing line between like the Celtic Arthurian and the French modern.
I prefer the Celtic versions, but you kind of have to pull in some of the French because Lancelot is so connected to the French versions. If you want Lancelot, you got to pull in a little of the French.
You have to use that, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, and like you said, you can do a lot of with Arthurian legends, because like mine, I've said it in modern day, all the Arthurian characters are immortal, because if you're into the magic, you're immortal.
Right.
Anyway, so they're still around today, and shit is happening due to other things. And so that's an ongoing series I'm still working on, is the Camelot Immortal series. But but that's a female driven series, that is. So I took all the female characters and made them the leads instead of like King Arthur and stuff. I mean, the guys are still there, they're just more in the background.
Right.
So it's like Nimwe's the main character, and Morgan Le Fay is there, and all the other female
like
characters.
Elaine and Guinevere.
Yeah. Well, Elaine is currently a rat.
Okay.
Yeah. Nimue turned her into a rat in the well, this is a spoiler if anyone has not read the prequel stories. She gets turned into a rat.
Well, fair enough.
Yeah, and Percival and Galahad take care of her. Yeah. They become a couple. And open an animal shelter. Wow.
Why not? Speaking, like, you know, on the topic of female-led Arthurian stuff, we'll putting aside the writer, because obviously she is not a great person. But I'm sure you probably read Mist of Avalon. Was that something?
I'm sorry, I was not a fan of Mist of Avalon.
Oh really? Oh, interesting.
I mean, I read it. It was okay. I mean, but it really never. I don't know. There was just never piqued my interest. I mean, I preferred. Yeah, I preferred. I think it's called The Forever King. Something like that. It's another modern day Arthurian tale sort of a
Right.
reincarnation of Arthur story. I like that. That one's a good one. And I'm sure I've read other ones that I can't remember at the moment.
Have you read the Steve McHugh ones?
Don't think so.
Yeah, you like them. They're another modern day kind of one, and he mixes like a lot of like conspiracy theories and Nazis as well, which he beats
Yeah.
up a lot of Nazis in his books, which is always great. But you might like those if you like the more like modern kind of twist.
Yeah. No, I've read some historical, like more kind of that skew more to the historical fiction kind of Arthur.
Yes. Like the
Oh,
Bernard
yeah,
Bernard
there's a
Cornwell.
really good trilogy out there that does the historical side of it, but I can't remember the writer and the name of it at the moment. I'm
There's
terrible
so
like
many.
that.
There's so
Yeah.
much. Isn't there? There's so much. So we're getting close to the end of the interview of not Ron and Anita. But why don't you? I mean, you have a lot of things. You're always writing. You're always working on things. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's coming up next for you?
Well, like I said, Fairy Tales and Nightmares, it's the sequel to Visions and Nightmares. That one hopefully will be up for beta reading in May, because I'm almost finished editing that, because I was stuck on one story, and that one story finally decided to edit itself. So, and I'm going to be finishing the final edits on the second story in the Hayward and Anderson Paranormal Steampunk Investigators short story series I've got. The second story is going to be up. That should be up, published in the summer.
Mhm.
And since the evil chicken is finally talking to me, I'm going to be probably finishing the first draft of Tales of the Norse Gods. Loki Saves the World this year as well. So
Excellent. And where can everyone find you? Because obviously there is the website. So why don't you tell us all about everywhere where we can find you?
Well, you can pretty much find it all on my website, afstewart.ca. My books are all over. They're wide. They're on Amazon, Kobo, Barnes and Noble, all the rest of them. I've got one audiobook that's wide as well. That's the first book in the Saga of the Outer Islands trilogy, and there's that trilogy will be continuing too. I'm going to be writing a second trilogy in that world.
Oh yeah,
Where Ray finds a girlfriend.
excellent.
Blackthorn.
I like
Blackthorn finally figures out he's in love with Rafe. So
excellent. I love other series in worlds. You know what I mean. I always kind of think like when you spent so long building a world, why just tell one story and then just go back and tell another story?
Well,
Like it's a big world.
I left the crew in the Lost Sea at the end of the first trilogy. I wrapped up all the story, but I left them in the Lost Sea, and they were going to stay there and explore. So that's basically what the next 3 books are. Them, they're going to explore, and they're going to find some more gods. Let's put it that way.
Oh, really? Excellent. And obviously, as well, on the Going In Now network, you have Words That Kill. So, how is that going?
Second season is recorded, so it's all up to Joe now.
Our benevolent overlord.
Yes, our benevolent overlord will have them uploaded when he gets to it in his schedule. So, but we got some good. We got yours hasn't aired yet, I don't think.
Yes.
I can't remember which ones Joe's aired and which ones he hasn't yet, because I mean it's like it's all a blur. Because I mean I got my other show too, and now I got a horror panel coming up next week that we're doing. So.
Oh yeah.
This is just a non-go indie now horror panel, but it should.
I'm sure you can mention it. Why don't you tell us all about it?
It's What Is Horror, and we've got 5 of us ladies are going to be talking about what horror is, subgenres, misconceptions, stuff like that. Nikki Nelson Hicks is going to be on it, as well as D.L. Tillery, Angela Eureka Smith, who is a Bram Stoker winner, by the way. Yes. And Elaine Pascal is going to be one of the panelists as well. I think that's
where is that going to be on?
That's going to be on my YouTube channel, March 22nd.
Check that out. Obviously, we will have all of you can find them all YouTube channel on your website, I'm sure.
Yeah. Just everything's under the social media pages, contacts, whatever it is. Excellent. I don't remember what I called it.
Excellent stuff. Well, thank you again, Anita, for coming on. Thank you for coming on to the Green Room as well. And it was a great show. I really, really enjoyed listening to you and Frank talking about it. And best of luck with the releases this year and with all the other stuff that you're doing. You're always very, very busy. And thank you for everyone that has come on to watch both of the interviews today and that has watched the Green Room so far. We will be back with more Green Room on the first Monday of April and another Basking in the Evergreen on the Friday afterwards. And we will be back, the Going In Now Network, has more programming for the rest of the week. There is This Week in Indies this Sunday, so please check that out. And we have much more programming because it is always time to go indie now.